welcome to Abbeville. I'd like a show of hands. How many of you guys are from Abbeville? Okay, a lot of you. Anybody from out of town? Good group. Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Welcome to Vermilion Parish. We're happy to have you. So you're attending those of you who have not been here before, this is your first Vermilion Historical Society meeting. And this society's been around since the 70s, and we're doing a lot currently to revamp it and bring in some great speakers and some great information. There's so much history in South Louisiana, and Vermilion Parish is full of it. For all of you guys who raise your hands from Abbeville, you know how many characters we have had through the times in this parish. It's wonderful. And without further ado, well, first of all, I'd like to ask you this. If you haven't become a member of our society, we sure would appreciate it. It's a grassroots organization. We come together quarterly to celebrate the history of Vermilion Parish, South Louisiana in general. And membership for a year is only $10, and you can speak to the Miss Mary back there. She'll be happy to take your money and make you a member. And you'll be getting, emails every now and then, access to our Facebook page, and we'll keep you updated on what we're cooking. And if you want to become a lifelong member, we'll take a Benjamin Franklin from you, a $100 bill, and you can be a part of our lifelong membership society. But without further ado, we're very excited to introduce a preeminent folklorist, internationally recognized as top of his game, and one of probably the biggest contributor to the resurgence and pride in our Cajun, Acadian, and Creole culture. He has been a professor at USL back in the day, and then UL later. He's a linguist. He is a folklorist, historian, wears many, many hats. Many of you might have seen him recently at Festivals Acadiens et Créoles, where he started that festival back in 1974, which is interesting because this was a time in our history when being Cajun wasn't all that popular. It was kind of looked down upon. And Barry had the brave idea to put people together to listen to our Cajun music. No dancing. Let's listen and watch these musicians perform a culture and a tradition that has been pervasive for generations. And he, and along with a few others, have really helped the resurgence and the revitalization of our Cajun and Creole heritage. But today he's going to talk to you about one of our characters of Vermilion Parish, and that's Mr. Ceasar Vincent. I don't want to give too much away, but this gentleman was a character. I think that's the best way to put it. And some of you guys here might remember him. He's deceased now, but Barry made it part of his life's work to research Ceasar Vincent and figure out the history behind him and his profound footprint on the world of music in South Louisiana. And one of the coolest things that I can think of about historians is when historians make history. And I'm being a little bold here, but Barry is part of a project out of the last year and a half that came out that he'll tell you about Ceasar Vincent's songs, incorporating modern musicians to reinterpret them. And as a member of the Academy for the Performing Arts, National Academy of the Recording Arts and Sciences, I can tell you that there's a lot of good vibe about this recording possibly being nominated for a Grammy Award coming up in this year. Wow. But without further ado, I've talked too long. I'd like to introduce you to somebody I'm very proud to call a dear friend of mine. I've learned so much from him over the years performing at his festival and becoming friends with him. Y'all give a big round of applause for Dr. Barry Ancelet.
First, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'll try to keep my professor voice going for most of the evening. As Eric was mentioning, in 1974, when we got the idea to do the first festival, Cajun and Creole music had sort of become, old people's music. None of the kids, we thought, none of the kids wanted to hear that. People had moved on. But what we hadn't considered was that this was the time of the counterculture revolution in 1968 on, and you know, there were hippies and young people all over the country reconsidering what was important. And a lot of times what they figured was important was local, who we are, where you come from, your own culture, your own, there was sort of a back to the roots movement, you know, local farm products, and discovering who the musicians were. There were, you know, this was in direct connection with the Newport Folk Festival that was celebrating this same issue. And when we did the first festival, there were a lot of people, you know, some people going out to dance halls back then, but they were only paying attention to the music enough to know when to put their next foot down, you know, the beat. It was either a waltz or a two-step. But Dewey Balfour got this great idea to put this on in a place where you couldn't dance. It was a concert, not a dance. Well, there were a lot of shiny seats that night. People wanted to dance real bad and were wiggling, but people paid attention to their music in a different way when they sat there and listened to it. Now, there were people long before then who had this idea that, you know, listening to music was a different thing, and the kinds of music, the kinds of songs that people would listen to, typically there weren't dance music. We forced people to listen to dance music, which was kind of counterintuitive, but people had a long history of listening to songs in the evening, or at special events like weddings or funerals or birthday parties or, you know, Christmas celebrations or whatever. People would gather together and people would listen to music, and so there was a singing tradition that didn't have anything to do with dance music tradition. You know, like people played dance music. People went to dances back then, at house dances first and then dance halls. But first, people, alongside that, people would gather together at their homes, or picnics or whatever, and listen to story songs. Now you have to understand that this was a time quand tout quelqu'un parlait français. Tout quelqu'un comprenait toutes les chansons. So everybody understood the lyrics, and they were listening to lyrics of, you know, old ballads that would tell stories, tragic love affairs, love lost, and you know, murders and all kinds of other things. But as they were listening, it was like watching television for them. It was like, you know, hearing a story. And we came to know rather quickly quite a bit about dance music tradition, because it was recorded. It was commercially recorded. It was on records, you know, and it was played on the radio, and it was available. You could go to a record store and buy it. And that was, you know, Nathan Apshire and Ira Lejeune and Lawrence Walker and Austin Peete and all of that crowd, you know, playing. They became popular. Not a whole lot of people knew about Elita Hofpower and Alma Bartholomé and you know, Agnes Bork and Ceasar Vincent. You know, those people in their neighborhoods knew them, people in their families knew them, but not a whole lot beyond that. And that tradition began to fade for several reasons, two of the important ones were that the language was beginning to fade, and so there were fewer and fewer people to understand the stories of the songs, but also that singing tradition was sort of displaced by dance hall tradition, and at the same time radio and records. You know, as early as the 20s and 30s, people in South Louisiana even were able to buy Jimmy Rogers records, or later, you know, Bing Crosby and Hank Williams and Elvis Presley, and that's, you know, what our own local family neighborhood singers didn't compare very favorably to those slick productions that were coming from somewhere else. Now, there were some places in the country where that singing tradition persisted into commercial records, like the Carter family, for example. old-time Appalachian music and country music still told stories. Here in South Louisiana, the language pressure added to the media pressure pretty much erased all that. And there were very, very few people still doing this when we did that first festival. Interestingly, it was 1974. Ceasar Vincent, who I'm going to talk to you about a little later, died in 1970. Turns out he had a huge repertoire of songs of that sort that pretty much nobody wanted to listen to anymore. Even people in his own family tell me that, you know, they would see him coming up the road, up the driveway for a visit, and they say, "Oh Lord, look who's here. See if you could keep him outside on the porch. He's going to start singing that old stuff." Well, it turns out that old stuff was important, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Now, we had learned a lot about the commercial side, the commercially recorded side of Cajun music, largely due to initially to Chris Strackwitz's recorded history, or anthology of important historical recordings in Cajun music. Up until then, there had been people who collected the other stuff, but I was not aware of it. Most of us were not aware of that. There were some people who were keenly aware of it and had done it here, notably Catherine Blanchette, who began recording in the 40s and recorded all through the rest of her life. She recorded Ceasar Vincent, for example, in 1953. But there were other people who came here from outside the area. John and Alan Lomax, John Lomax here, recording in 1934 on Avery Island, a singer with an aluminum disc engraving machine. Somebody referred to it once as portable. He said, well, it was movable. Not so portable. It weighed about 350 pounds, and it was running off of the idling car, his idling car that you see in the So the Lomaxes recorded stuff in the 1930s, 34 here. This is Alan Lomax, who was 18 in 1934, working with his father, tagging along. Alan had studied French in school. His father didn't speak French, and Alan claimed he understood all these songs. I'm here to tell you, he may have understood book French, but I don't think he understood this French. But they recorded a huge number of songs, a lot of them here in Vermilion Parish, in neighboring Iberia Parish and Acadia Parish, including Sidney Richard and Lennis Vincent, who, I'll play you a few examples in a minute, who were recorded singing old French ballads who else did he record here? He recorded them, by the way, in Kaplan. They lived near Kaplan. He recorded them one Sunday morning when they were in a bar. They had borrowed Papa's mule to go to church, and they were in a bar. And he met him there, and Lomax came in and said he was looking for people who sang old French songs, and everybody in the bar pointed at them. And so he took them across the street into the loading chute of the rice mill and recorded them there. And they went home, and they could never tell anybody in their families what they had done because it was supposed to be a church. Lomax sent Ralph Rensler, who was working for the Newport Folk Festival here in 1964. That field trip resulted in the invitation of Dewey Balfa, Gladys Thibodeau, and Vitus Lejeune to play at Newport in '64. And as they say, the rest is history. That first experience showed these musicians that there was a different kind of appreciation for what we were told was nothing but old chanky-chank, keep that in the closet. They got a standing ovation for playing the music that people were here were kind of a little embarrassed about. Well, Dewey Balfa, for one, came back to Louisiana, determined to bring home the echo, as he put it, the echo of that standing ovation back to Louisiana. And that's one of the reasons why we did the first festival in '74. Lomax's idea was, he called it cultural guided missiles. He figured if you could identify a culture like this and send in some support, send in some attention, make it feel good about itself, it might work. And they recorded hundreds of songs here in South Louisiana, and he said over and over again, they said on the recordings, we're recording this for the future generations to have access to, so they can learn the songs of their past and not lose them, and hopefully it will serve to enrich the music of the future. This was in 1934, and he was hoping wildly, that this would happen. Well, turns out it did. And we ended up, having this big festival outside in Girard Park that some of you know about. This is Dennis McGee, having just finished his set, moved by the huge ovation he just got. Appreciation, home, from home, not Newport, home, very important. And he's preaching to the crowd, telling them how happy he is. And there's Alan Lomax, who was 18 in 1934, still very much alive and happy. And I asked him, Alan, what do you think about this? And he said, damn, it worked. It worked. Look at this. This culture is doing great.
What year?
Huh? That was probably 79 or 80. And this is André Gladu, a Quebec filmmaker who had done a number of documentaries. So they've come back to Louisiana saying, oh my God, these people are surviving. Not only that, they're thriving. They found their feet again. And it was largely due to the work of these people. Now, getting back to the Vincents, this is Lennis Vincent, who sang for Lomax in '34. As he was 17 or 18 years old with his cousin Sidney Richard, I was trying to track down the descendants of the people who had sung for Lomax in '34, because we had obtained a copy of the collection from the Library of Congress and brought it home to UL, and we were listening to it and sharing it with musicians, and I wanted to make cassette copies of the family's contributions to take it all the way back home, And I was looking for the descendants of Sidney Richard and Lennis Vincent. Well, it turns out they weren't dead. They were still very much alive. They were 17, 18 when they sang in '34. My friend Lionel Leleu, who's also from Vermilion Parish, a well-known fiddler who played with Lawrence Walker and others, helped me find them. And here he is looking at the notes that I had done for a record project that we did of these Lomax recordings. So we put them back out there, really the raw recordings. And musicians from this area fell in love with this stuff. I'm going to bail out of this for a second and give you an idea of what was going on. Some of the what happened was some of these musicians started recycling this stuff. This is an example of something that was recorded in Crowd. Now, nobody had heard that, nobody had heard that for decades, because it was unavailable. It was in the Library of Congress. We brought it back here and let people hear about it. And next thing you know, they're falling in love with it. This is Michael Doucet and Beau Soleil.
soir végétal, le soleil est couché, suivez loin dans la maison. Qu'avez-vous, oui, belle blanc? Avez-vous, oui, belle brune? Mais c'est tout pour la blanc et pas rien pour la brune.
So something absolutely modern and beautiful came from that ancient song. Now, not a lot of people are going to listen to this. It is historically important and artistically important, but how many people are going to listen to that on the radio? But a lot of people would listen to Beausoleil on the radio. And this sort of thing happened a lot. This is an example of jure singing that was recorded in 1934 at Lake Arthur. Lomax recorded, as far as I know, the only examples of live jure singing, and it's a tradition of African Creole tradition that pretty much faded away, and Zydeco displaced it by adding instruments. But some of the contemporary Zydeco musicians heard that and decided that was fun stuff. This is Lynn August. And imitating the way it was done historically. And more recently, Cedric Watson. Now, first time Cedric Watson did that live at festivals like Idea, the crowd went absolutely berserk. There's something, I don't know, powerful, spiritual, raw, wonderful about it. Now, they're still doing it, in that case, in the same style that Lomax recorded. Sometimes musicians from here would hear this stuff and you know, try to reproduce that early style. Sometimes they played with it a little bit. This was recorded in a bar, a bunch of drunks, some brasses and sauniers singing in a bar in Erath. Lomax happened to be there, and he was interested in old ballads of stuff, but he was also interested in drinking songs. There they were. And so they started singing in this bar, and this is what came up. You can, everything for the brunette, nothing for the blonde. So Steve Riley and the Mambo Playboys heard that and fell in love with it and wanted to do a version of it. Now, Steve Riley is playing with David Greeley, who lived for a while in Texas and was involved in Protestant church singing, which had, you know, a history of harmony singing. And so he brought that to the group, and this is the way they did that song.
Le soleil blanche couché, et mon cheval est proche las, et j'ai faim et j'ai soif, et je suis loin ma famille. Bye bye jolie brune, et bye bye jolie blonde, mais ça c'est tout pour la brune, et pas bien pour la blonde.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, it sounds like in a church where those guys were supposed to be. And one last example that I find really remarkable. This was recorded by Lomax in 1934, a guy named Luc Hébert. song, and if you listen very carefully, the melody is really nice and the words are really nice, and Kelly Jones and Megan Brown heard that and figured it out.
What's the title?
Exactly the same melody, same words. Gorgeous? Wow. Something that old and fragile seeming turns into something absolutely modern and easily consumable. A play on the radio is a big hit. And, you know, we don't have to twist their arms to put that on their set list when they play in venues, you know. The musicians genuinely fall in love with this stuff. They're not doing this as an academic exercise. They do it because they find these songs really interesting. Now, why do we have those songs? We have those songs because some folklorists had the vision to collect them. Lomax in the 30s, there was a guy named William, do you remember? Anyway, somebody in the 40s. And then Catherine Blanchette here in Vermilion Parish started in the 40s and into the 50s and later, recording people who were around her, just realizing that there was this treasure trove that virtually nobody was paying attention to. I think her family's here tonight. I think she first sort of got a hold of that, but she was teaching and heard her kids singing, and they were singing really interesting old French songs. She said, "Where did you learn that?" "Well, from grandma and uncles." So she recorded the kids, rebounded and recorded the families, and left an amazing treasure trove that has, by the way, just been deposited at the South Louisiana Studies Archives, and did her master's thesis on Louisiana French folk songs among children in Vermilion Parish, 1942 to 1954. These kinds of song capturings were what grabbed this stuff, preserved it before it fell off the table. Ceasar Vincent, for example, died in 1970. Apparently, nobody in his family pretty much learned any of these songs, and so when he died, just whoop, all of that fell off the table. As was the case for a lot of people, except for the fact that Catherine in 53 and Harry Oster in 57 had the vision to record them. This was Harry Oster in the middle, who also recorded quite a bit in South Louisiana, Vermilion Parish, including Ceasar Vincent. And this is Ceasar Vincent.
Can you make it big screen?
His glasses are a little cockeyed. He was a little, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was a little quirky. His own family has said that he might have been, he was funny. He had a great sense of humor, beloved by his family, but they also realized that he was that he never owned a car. Died in 1970. Never owned a car or TV. Never owned a radio. Listened to Cousin Dud. Pretty much walked or rode a horse wherever he went. He would walk to the grocery store, for example, and people on the side of the road said they could hear him before you saw him. He would sing everywhere. He loved to sing. He would sing everywhere. He didn't have a whole lot of a filter. Like you'd be shopping at the Mo store and in buying beans. And next thing you know, Ceasar singing a plein voix too. He didn't sing. Somebody who lived in his neighborhood said that they lived about a quarter of a mile across the pasture from him, and they would sit on the porch at night and listen to him sing a quarter mile away. Same for everybody. I'll let you see him in a few. That's him on the right with his family in his khakis.
Can you make your screen big, Barry?
Oh, sorry. Let's try that again. Go through it. There he is. Apparently that was the only suit he owned. I was told anyway. He usually wore khakis. He's a working man. He had a subsistence farm in Vermilion Parish near Leroy. And that's him and his wife. Comment s'appelle? Olive. His wife Olive. And so I'm going to bail out of this again to play you something. If anybody outside of his own family would have known Ceasar Vincent at all, it would have likely have been accidentally through his version of Travailler C'est Trop Dur, which it became an absolutely iconic song in the French world. A group named Grand-Mère Funniness Folk in 1972 or 3 found it in an archive from an Oster recording that he had deposited in Paris, in an archive there, and fell in love with that song, did a version of it, and added a harmony, and it sounded like this. Oh, sorry. Oops. The line that you're hearing as the melody was the line Zachary Richard heard as the melody also. That version of that song went wild, and one of the most famous singers at the time in France, Julien Clerc, covered it.
Travailler c'est trop dur, et voler c'est pas beau.
It was in the top 10 for months and months in France.
C'est quelque chose je peux pas faire. Chaque jour que moi je vis, on me demande de quoi je vis.
And he went viral in all kinds of styles. It's a French pop version.
Huh?
Travailler c'est trop dur et voler c'est pas beau. Mon
Now, I'm telling you, this song became an iconic hit all over the French-speaking world. You know, how many of you here could sing it? Isn't that stunning? That, you know, very few people. I mean, in Paris, in 2015, somebody was holding a choral singing workshop in a theater of about 950 people. And in order to get everybody warmed up, he explained, he said, let's all sing a song together. Don't worry about it. It's like singing the national anthem in a stadium. You know, don't worry about the pitch or anything. We just warm up and sing a song everybody knows, Travailler C'est Trop Dur. And everybody in the place starts singing it. With no prompting at all. He just assumed that everybody there would know it. And everybody did. In case you don't believe me.
On n'est pas très très beau, mais c'est très efficace. C'est bien. C'est comme les autres, alors c'est bien.
But they warmed up.
Ma petite poésie. Ils sont plus durs. On va quand même l'apprendre pas à pas. Ça s'appelle, on va montrer à vous, ça vous fait plaisir. Travailler, c'est trop dur. Ça vous va bien? La voix principale. La voix principale. Jardin.
The whole place is singing it. They know all the words. Now they know the melody. They know the whole. Now, you might notice that you haven't heard Ceasar yet. Where all this came from. The recording that was in that archive in Paris when Vermilion Parish folk heard it and redid it. This was it. It's Ceasar Vincent. And I guarantee you, none of those people in that Paris auditorium, or anybody listening to this, or anybody who ever bought any of those records have a clue that it came from Leroy, Louisiana. In Vermilion Parish. From that recording.
Woo!
That was the only possible source that they could have had for those words, and you may notice that the melody's not the same. Listen again. Right? That's rye whiskey. Okay? But what happened was, in Vermilion Parish's folks recording, the melody was mixed lower than the harmony. The guy who was mixing it didn't know which was which, and he mixed the harmony hotter. And the harmony, if you sing them together, can you sing that? No.
I can't even sing the alphabet.
I'll try to do it with Zachary. Okay, let's sing. Now, I'm here to tell you, I cannot sing harmony. But I just did. Except I was singing the melody. The actual melody. I was letting Zachary sing the harmony. But the harmony became the international hit melody. Anyway, so based on this one song, I kind of knew a little bit of this story because I'm a longtime friend of Zachary Richard's and Michael Doucet, and we, this is something we've talked about. So one day I'm at Ceasar's having coffee in Lafayette, and Kevin Reese, who's here, drops in. He says, "Hey, aren't you Barry Ancelet?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you ever hear of Ceasar Vincent?" I said, "Yeah, he did Travailler C'est Trop Dur." He said, "You want to know some more about him?" I said, "There's more?" "Yeah, absolutely." So he gets a cup of coffee, sits down, we start talking. And he mentions to me at one point that one of his cousins had uploaded 23 songs that Catherine had given to the family on a cassette or something. She had uploaded this to Reverb Nation. And I said, wait, there's 23 more songs? We only knew about this one. I only knew about this one. Now, if I'd been more curious, I would have known about the others, but just occurring to me, this was about 2.5 years ago. So I go there and I hear these songs. My God, these are really interesting, ancient, old songs. So I started wondering, I wonder if anybody else recorded them. I called Chris Segura, who works in our archives, and I said, Chris, did anybody else record some guy named Ceasar Vincent? And he got back to me the next day. He said, yeah, Harry Oster recorded him too. He recorded 36 songs. I said, oh, Jesus. There was some overlap, some of the same songs. But if you eliminate the overlap, there were 44 songs, 44 different songs that Ceasar Vincent was recorded singing. Some of them were curious translations of contemporary radio hits. But of the 44, I started doing some homework, because this is what I do, and I discovered that 30 of them, 30 of the 44, I was able to trace back to the French Middle Ages.
Wow.
So people often ask me, well, how would you do that? Homework. See all of these? This is a study of French medieval songs that are known to come from medieval sources, and those are the ones that Ceasar Vincent had sung.
Wow.
So I'm sitting in my bed at night transcribing this, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is an unbelievable treasure. Who was this guy? And so I start, contacting family members through Kevin and others, and I found out a little bit about him, about his life, and very unassuming subsistence farmer who lived in a little dead-end lane near Leroy, and he wasn't anything, he didn't perform really. I mean, I think he appeared at the Dairy Festival one year and something like that, but I mean, he never was commercially recorded or anything. He was just a guy who knew songs. Well, boy did he. And were they ever important? So, knowing the track record of some of the contemporary musicians for falling in love with the earlier stuff, the Lomax stuff and the Oster collections, I contacted him and said, hey, there are 44 songs with this one guy, and they're all absolutely amazing. So I started contacting the usual suspects, and we decided they decided they wanted to do a tribute by recording contemporary versions of some of those old songs. Zachary Richard, Steve Riley, the Mamou Playboys, Phil Foley, Roddy Romero, and Eric Adcock, Wayne Toops, Bonsoir Catin, Sam Broussard, Anne Savoy, Jane Redrine, David Doucet, Anne-Laura Edmiston, Jordan Thibodeau. I mean, a who's who. And they all fell in love with this stuff, and here's what they did, right? Oops. Here's an example. Zachary Richard, who, by the way, had been one of the first to launch Travailler C'est Trop Dur, was delighted to be part of the project, and he chose this song about a girl who's trying to sell oranges, and she's sent around for payment all over the place, and she finally says, to hell with all of them. I give up, I'll keep my oranges.
En arrière de tienne, mon père, il y a une orange, te voilà. En arrière de tienne, mon père, il y a une orange, te voilà. Nous dirons, nous verrons, nous dirons les vannes, nous les remplirons. Nous dirons, nous verrons, dirons les vannes, nous les remplirons.
En arrière de chez mon père, il y a un oranger, le voilà. En arrière de chez mon père, il y a un oranger, le voilà. Nous irons, nous boirons, nous talirons les vallées, nous les remplirons. Nous irons, nous boirons, nous talirons les vallées, nous les remplirons. Le était tellement chargé que les branches touchaient la terre, le voilà. Le était tellement chargé que les branches touchaient la terre, la voilà. Nous irons, nous boirons, nous tarirons les vallées, nous les remplirons. Nous irons, nous boirons, nous tarirons les vallées, nous les remplirons.
It's an ancient song. It goes back to about the 15th century, 15th, 16th century in France, and very well known throughout the French-speaking world, but attested here by this recording of Ceasar Vincent. If it hadn't been for him, I don't know that we would have connected to it. Another example. So Steve Riley, the Model Playboys, won the arm wrestling contest for that one, and turned it into Swamp Pop. Up that melody, it was there. I said, man, how'd you get that swamp poppy? He said, just accented a few things, but he said the melody was there, the words are there. The words, the lyrics, are a treasure trove of oral poetry that we need to be aware of from our past so that we know where the future is going. One of my professors, Henry Glassy at Indiana University, in the folklore program, once described living tradition as using the past to create the future. And that's exactly what's happening. Now, let's be honest, would people, be absolutely thrilled to listen to Ceasar Vincent on the radio? Maybe as a historical interest, of course. And he could carry a tune, and he held the beat, he held rhythm. But let's face it, I mean, for the same reason that people were sort of avoiding him after World War II, even in his own neighborhood. It's a bit raw, but it's a powerful source. And with the creative talents of the people here in South Louisiana, it turns into some brand new stuff, brand new songs. They sound absolutely modern. And they're part of our heritage, which is one of the reasons why they're important to preserve. Let me give you the one that Eric was on. Everybody was arm wrestling over this song. This was the eighth song in Ceasar. And this one is not medieval. It's obviously more local. It's influenced by,
I might say a word about it. Go ahead.
It's influenced by Creole, probably some Creole culture from here. So it's very syncopated. It's it's crooked, as musicians call it. It's a crooked tune. And everybody was arm wrestling over this. Wayne Toops won the arm wrestling contest because Wayne Toops will win most arm wrestling contests. But then he backed off of it at the last minute, and we were kind of stuck like, well, okay, now what do we do? And Roddy Romero had come up with the arrangement. Roddy and Eric had come up with this really interesting arrangement, and so we were talking about it. And said, "Well, who's going to do this?" I said, "Roddy, don't you think you can pull this off?" And he said, "I didn't think you were going to ask." So it fell into Roddy's lap. And listen to the original.
Do you mind if I say one word about it?
Yeah, please.
Real quick. So, normally as a songwriter, as a musician, you get an opportunity to perform a song you've heard before, but all we had was the lyric. All we had was that strange man's voice.
Wait, hold on. This.
Avec ta mérétine du coton du Nord et de l'Itoulaya. Avec ta mérétine
Feel
du
that?
coton du
Hold
Nord
on.
et de
Stick
l'Itoulaya.
with it just a second.
Dis-toi qu'il aime pas moi, dis-toi qu'il aime pas moi, c'est un péché mortel qu'il fait. Avec ta mérétine du coton du Nord et de l'Itoulaya.
Here.
Oh madame, donnez-moi vos petites filles à moi. Avec ta mérétine du coton du Nord et de l'Itoulaya.
I mean, wow.
So Barry's talking to me about it before the recording, and he sends me this song, and I'm like, how are we gonna make chicken salad out of this? This is difficult. It was very hard. By the way, there's another great musician in the room, Sam Broussard from Steve Riley and the Mabu Playboys, who's on this record. He's a genius guitar player and songwriter. Thanks for coming, Sam. He had the same task of taking something so strange and odd and making something modern out of it. And so, very honored to be part of this project, but we felt that rhythm. And
It took an hour and a half to lay down the drum track.
Right. And then I played organ on it, Roddy.
And we had, I'm talking about a good drummer, a terrific drummer.
Yeah, Curly Taylor.
Curly Taylor.
And, but it kind of felt like reggae. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, well, this happened to me for 3.5 months. We're working with 62 of the most creative, inventive, talented minds in South Louisiana music. Every day, I got it, every other day or so, I got to go to the studio and see what they would come up with. And my talent was to just stay out of the way.
So, quick question. Can I ask?
So that's what they heard, right?
Hey, Barry, we got a question?
Yes, yeah.
Quick question. How did Ceasar Vincent come to know these old songs?
Well, he learned them from neighbors or his family. I think his parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts sang. He was just like a human tape recorder. And, there weren't any books or anything else. You just learned that at home.
If I can say, this was our music before the accordion came here. I had another great aunt who sang similar songs. Sadly, nobody recorded her. But this was our music 120 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Now, interestingly, these 44 songs, I asked somebody in his family, I said, does that seem about right? Buford, where you at? I think it was either Buford or
Douillon,
Huh?
Paul Douillon.
he said, does that seem about right? And he said, oh no, he sang hundreds of songs. They just happened to capture those 44. Okay, so back to the song. Let me remind you what you heard.
Avec ta mérétine du coton du Nord et de l'Itoulaya.
Okay?
Avec ta mérétine du coton du Nord et de l'Itoulaya.
That's right, baby. It got funky. Exactly what you are.
This song speaks about Abbeville.
If you don't love me, it's a mortal sin. They were following him note for note, beat for beat. Makes me wiggle. I'm gonna let it play all the way because he sings about Abbeville in the end.
Can you tell us what he says about Abbeville, the French translation?
Yeah. Zach. Zachary Richard was playing harmonica. Allons samedis à Abbeville. Let's go every Saturday to Abbeville. It rains every day in Abbeville. So, Zachary Richard had come in to just play a harmonica track, right? And all the vocal tracks were already laid. And the microphone's right here. So he realized that he knew that recurring chorus. Avec sa mère et Jane et du coton du nord et de sous la yard. So he started singing halfway through the song. Chris Segura said, "Is he singing?" I said, "Yeah. Shh. We're gonna have a third voice. It's okay. We get Zachary Richard for free." By the way, how about Zachary Richard on the harmonica there, right? And Eric on the organ.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so Ceasar Vincent didn't write these
No.
songs. So but he just sang them. But he never recorded them commercially.
No.
So he doesn't own any
Well,
rights to these
I mean,
songs. Does
it'd
he
be
get
hard-
credit for
It
these songs?
would be hard to argue, that you own the rights to a medieval song.
Right.
He
I
was
understand that.
just a person he was a source, and one of the things we wanted to do with this project was acknowledge his contribution just for learning all these songs and remembering them and singing them.
Yeah, that's
Now,
what I mean. Does he
I want
get
to say
credit
too,
for that?
he died in 1970. The first festival was 74. A whole bunch of documentaries came out in the early 70s. We started getting invited to Smithsonian Festival and National Festival all over the place in the 70s. He died about 4 years before he would have become a hero, unfortunately. But guess what? He's a hero
Yeah.
because of this rediscovery and putting this stuff back. I mean, I can guarantee you, all these musicians think the world of him.
And to answer your question, the record is our homage to him. His name is on the album. It's about him.
Yeah.
So
The record is called The Lyrical Legacy of Ceasar Vincent.
The what now?
The Lyrical Legacy of Ceasar Vincent. I have some here if y'all want. Since Sam is here, let's listen to what Sam did. Sam Broussard, who's in the back, my longtime friend, and he's got a recording studio in his house so he can play with stuff and not owe a lot of money to the recording studio owner. He heard this, and it won't sound very much different. You'll see.
Là-bas, au-dans des bois, j'attendais qu'une voix était ma bien-aimée, criant dans votre voix de tout dans nos amours, ça fait pleurer sans terre.
Okay, so Sam heard that, and he decided, it was an absolute stroke of genius to let Ceasar sing.
Là-bas, au-dans des bois, j'attendais qu'une voix était ma bien-aimée, criant dans votre voix de tout dans nos amours, ça fait pleurer sans cesse.
So he went from somebody that few people wanted to hear anymore to singing with a Grammy-nominated musician.
Several.
Là-bas, au-dans des bois, j'attendais qu'une voix était ma bien-aimée.
I'll let you hear the whole thing because there's a surprise to you. As I said, you know, he went from somebody that people were, you know, reluctant to let in the house because he was going to start singing that old stuff, to being somebody who was singing with a Grammy-nominated musician. When I played that for some of the family members, I mean, they teared up. It was kind of a moving thing. Ceasar finally appreciated for what he did. I'm going to play you just one more example because it goes in another direction. This is a song about a young lady who is kidnapped by 3 captains, army captains, and they've taken her away. They're going to intending to rape her, I guess, and when she hears of their plan, she falls dead. Falls dead. And they say, oh my God, well, now what do we do with her? And one of them says, well, let's take her back to her father's house where we found her and bury her under the trois fleurs de lis. Why trois fleurs de lis? Well, it might have been a flower, but it might have been the French flag. Anyway, they take her back, and 3 days later she appears knocking at her father's door saying, to save my honor, I feigned death for 3 days. It's Romeo and Juliet, except it works this time. So this is Anne Savoie and Jane Dream came up.
Sous ces toits rosiers blancs, la belle est endormie. Sous ces toits rosiers blancs, la belle est endormie, belle comme le jour, main blanche comme de la neige. Toi, brave capitaine, semble lui faire l'amour.
She said she wanted to sound like a nun in a convent.
Blanche comme de la neige,
Just crooked. How about that? Now, I'll remind you things about that song. That was recorded at Staffland Studios in Lafayette, Louisiana, with people from here. That's the kind of talent we have running around loose in South Louisiana, all of these songs. And that's the kind of potential there is to produce music for the future that's connected to the past. The lyrical legacy, the oral poetry, the melodies, they're all worth preserving. You just have to find them, discover them, expose them, make them available, and fall in love with them, and this is what happens. You may have heard the violin, or the, I think it was a viola maybe. That was Daniel Gale. And when he was recording that part of the track, I was looking in the studio and I said, he looks like he's reading something. He had a music stand. He's reading something. So when he took a break, I went in there and said, are you reading something? He said, yeah, the only way I could be sure to get this right, note for note, it's so complicated, was to write it out, to score it out for myself. I said, wow, that's really cool. Can I see? And I looked, and I know enough from reading music from high school band when I was a kid, but time signatures and all that. I noticed, I said, oh my God, it was in alternating measures. 6/4 time, 5/4 time, 6/4 time, 5/4 time, 6/4 time. It's like ridiculously complicated.
It's like the Middle Ages.
Huh? Yeah. And the reason, I said, that's really something. He said, well, that's how he was singing it. That's how he was singing it on his porch, you know? Well, Ceasar was singing it that way because he didn't have to play with a band. He didn't have to, you know, he wasn't singing for dancers. You try to dance to that, you'd break your ankles. Right?
It's almost like Gregorian chant.
Exactly. And the alternating meters, he tells me, it was a common feature of music during that time. These are the kinds of things that we were discovering all the way through this thing, you know, with these 62 amazing performers who participated in this project. Every day I got to go to the studio, and my wife had to give me Xanax at night to give me the sleep. I was on such a buzz. I couldn't.
She said she was so tired of sleeping with Ceasar, man.
And we were running a tight schedule, hoping to get the CD in time for the festival, but I didn't want to rush it because I didn't want to get anything wrong, and it was tight. And finally it came in. It sounded great, and we launched it at this pre-festival event. And my wife grabbed me that night. She said, "Listen, it's good. Let it be good. Go to sleep. Let it be good." So, are there any questions or comments, or I mean, I know I've taken up like.
I was going to say that the song that Eric performed in, for those that might not be from Vermilion Parish, did you translate that?
No.
Oh.
Okay.
You know, wait. What I usually say is, "You don't speak French?
Learn it.
There's
Learn
a
it.
cure for that." That's the French professor. Let's see. Oh, the Mary Jane song.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Well, look, let me tell you, I thought it was avec sa mère indienne, her Indian mother, et du coton du Noragat, et di Tulaya. I thought, what the hell is a Tulaya? What's a Tulaya? Never heard of that. It might be, I got excited. It might be Creole. It might be a Takapau remnant. You know, some kind of linguist goes nuts. So I'm trying to tease this out. I finally, in the course of this research, Kevin was taking me to some of the family members, and I called, I realized that my friend Lynn Douillon lived in Leroy, and I said, you know, he might know somebody who might have known him or heard him. He said, oh yeah, my Uncle Paul, who lives nearby, remembers him. Uncle Paul's 97 or 8 or something. Huh?
99.
99. He said, yeah, so we went over there. He said, oh yeah, I remember Ceasar. I used to go to house dances and listen to him sing. And so I said, well, would you recognize his voice or his songs? He said, I guess. So I just happened to have that one up. And he said, oh, that's not a chanson, Mary Jane. not Méridien, it was Mary Jane. So Nokpal helped me to not make a fool of myself, guessing what it meant. And so I said, what's the rest? Oh, ça c'est Dissous-la-Yard. Du coton du Nord à Dissous-la-Yard. Cheap 10-cent cotton from the north. Instead of home weave, homespun, brown cotton. Thank God I went to visit Nopal. So it's basically a story about a young man who's asking for the hand of this woman, this girl, in marriage. He's asking her mother, and he says, if you give her to me, I'll call you Mama. If you don't give her to me, I'll call you Madam. Give her to me, I can take care of her. She's wearing cheap cotton, and Mary Jane's. I'll do better for her. If you don't give her to me, and you give her to someone else, it's a mortal sin. C'est un péché mortel tu fais. So give her to. He was trying to convince his mother to give her daughter in marriage to him. That's what that's about. That's why it's funky.
That's why it's funky.
Anybody else? Yeah.
You think that in studying Ceasar, I saw that he had an intention of passing on this music, or he just sang because he enjoyed it so much?
He just sang because he loved to sing, and he had picked this up without anybody making him do it or suggesting that he do it. He just loved it, and so I guess he figured the same would happen. But as radio, media, and English were all encroaching.
But he must have heard those songs from family members
Yeah.
or whatever in order to.
Mm-hmm. He heard them from his family and his friends. The Vincents, by the way, were apparently a well-known singing family. When I talked to Lennis Vincent, he told me that the Vincents would get invited to weddings and parties all the time because they knew they would sing. That, for the price of punch and cake, you got entertainment.
Yeah.
So the Vincents were apparently well known, and there were some other connections. The Broussards and the Falks were all singers, and they just knew those songs. But by the time Ceasar was getting older, he was 87 when he died in 1970, and all that stuff had gotten pushed out.
And no one from his own family took
Sorry?
that over? No one from his own family, his kids?
As far as we know, I don't think anybody.
Singing them now.
Huh?
Somebody singing them now.
Now there's somebody singing.
I mean,
No, I'm told no. I don't know. One of his daughters knew a few songs.
Yeah, and some of my family knew them, but nobody listened to this sort of stuff.
Barry, we were the next door neighbors.
Yeah.
And you guys said.
Could you hear him across the way?
Oh, yeah.
That's what they say, right?
Yeah, but we live right in the middle of a field. It wasn't a dead end, it was an chant that would go to his house. And they were the next door neighbors, and now you gotta set the setting. This was I was born in 43, so I guess we're talking about 46, 47. There was no electricity there. Everybody would sit on their porches, and at night, it would get dark, and it was very quiet. And I'd hear that noise. I thought it was noise, and my mom would say, "Go to bed." She's gonna stop after.
Well, apparently he would start singing like that out of the blue in the nursing home or the funeral home or the grocery store.
He never missed a funeral.
He never missed it.
I'm 90 years old, and that's way back. And every week, at least once or twice, he'd come at night and see him come on the levee. There was a canal, the Hunter Canal was there. We said, "Oh, Ceasar's coming," and he'd sing all night. Play the month.
Yeah.
And I was about 10 or 12, I guess.
He was often described as being a little quirky, but sometimes quirky people are on the money. There's a story about him. His wife Olive, her job on the farm was to milk the cow. That was one of her chores. And one day, at one point, she got sick and couldn't go milk the cow. And so, in order to not disturb the cow, he put on one of her dresses. And went out and milked the cow. Now that sounds a little odd, but think about it. They needed that milk. And sometimes cows could hold back if they got upset.
Speaking of one of the daughters was singing, it was my mother. She can take up a song, you play it one time, she can sing it all through it.
All through it.
She was one of them, one of them.
Yeah, this is one of his grandsons.
But I was gonna let you know, we used to go pick up cotton, leave on Friday night, go spend the night. The next morning, when we start picking up cotton, by 9 o'clock, we could hear my grandpa inside the house, in his chair, rocking. I was 100 or maybe 1,000 feet away, we could hear him singing. The only way he would stop singing, they said, "Gan bon mouger." He would shut up.
So, communities need to pay attention to everybody in them. You never know where the treasures are gonna be. We need to value all of our parts.